Now, in light of the recent news that Apple, Google, Starbucks and other multinationals are all facing closer scrutiny around their corporate tax structures in different countries, it's not surprising that chief executive officers around the world are now reconsidering how they approach the thorny issue of taxes and the potential damage it can cause to their corporate brands. CCTV's Angelo Coppola found this report in a recently conducted survey as the G8 summit opens in Northern Ireland, and it's expected to touch on tax avoidance, among other matters.
Some analysts are calling for the structures to be thrown out, suggesting that applying a band-aid to the problem won't resolve the issue. It does appear that many companies only apply the tax rules and haven't considered the reputational risk. Cor Kramwinkel, Associate Director in Corporate International Tax at PwC, explains why.
Morality, ethics, desire, wish of the population needs to come into play when the policymakers decide what rules do I need to draft in order for me to achieve that objective. The company is only there to apply the rules that they have given and not to make decisions on what may be fair in the eyes of some and unfair in the eyes of others.
Karel Gericke, head of corporate tax at MTN in South Africa, says that businesses will enter countries where they have certainty from a legal, commercial and tax perspective. These companies will also generally serve their key stakeholder interests in terms of providing shareholder value.
It's no secret that a company exists to create shareholder value and shareholder wealth, right? And ultimately, tax plays an important part there, right? And if you can legally, right, minimize your tax, right, there should be no problem with that whatsoever.
Tax practitioners will tell you that they work within the rules and the laws of the land that their businesses operate in. Increasingly, though, it appears that they are becoming more aware of the softer, more emotive issues that don't really have a place in tax considerations.
It's a difficult balancing act that any tax director in an organisation needs to be aware of. Yes, we can only operate in terms of what the law is before us, and that's what we need to do. But at the same time, you need to have this broad awareness on the impact for the reputation of the business as a whole and what that might do to the value of the brand. So it needs to be taken into consideration, and very often that boils down to making sure that the commercial drivers for whatever's been done from a tax perspective and that the necessary substance to those arrangements is given effect to.
The unwelcome light of public attention on several American multinationals and their tax strategies will serve as a warning to their CEO compatriots around the world. It's also an opportunity for regional economic groupings in Africa to take best practices in tax and build African solutions that meet their revenue demands. While tax planning might be a boring topic for some of us, corporate CEOs are going to start paying more attention because their stakeholders are going to start applying more pressure and make them more accountable from an ethical and moral perspective. I'm Angelo Coppola for CCTV in Johannesburg.
CCTV's Melanie Ralph is keeping a close eye on the proceedings in Northern Ireland. She joins us now live from London in the UK. Melanie, Syria, of course, looking set to top the agenda in Northern Ireland, but little surprise here, the state of the global economy isn't going to be far behind in the discussions. Now, the big question, of course, is the role of central banks and monetary policy, not to mention the fact that Abenomics has been looming large in the markets for the last couple of weeks. What are we likely to hear from these talks?
Well, you're absolutely right. All eyes are now on what the Federal Reserve is going to do next. The markets got spooked by the last Fed meeting when Mr. Bernanke hinted towards tapering off its bond buying purchases, and central bank liquidity has lifted not only struggling developed economies, but more importantly, pushed developing and emerging economies up the economic pecking order. The big question now is not so much if the central banks will turn off the tap of liquidity. There has to be an end at some point. It's when will the intervention stop? And although the US central bank tapering isn't expected this week, for example, some analysts are eyeing as early as October for some pullback. But no doubt markets will be picking apart the meeting this Wednesday to get more answers.
The UK Prime Minister David Cameron is also expected to go guns blazing in on tax, trade and transparency matters. If he does get support for the idea he's pitching in Northern Ireland this week, how would it affect African countries, especially with respect to trade in commodities?
Yeah, well, after Syria, as you say, business and trade will be high up the agenda today. The UK's Prime Minister and host of the G8 meeting will be highlighting that countries all need to get on board to make trade more structured. And when it comes to Africa, the relationship between UK and Africa in particular is getting stronger by the day. And Cameron is wanting to tackle some of the fundamental issues that are stopping trade flows reaching higher levels. He wants to push for more provisions to prevent corruption and supply disruption, and one way to do this is to increase accountability and transparency, put systems in place that will see money flowing back into communities to increase the economic strength of individual African economies.
Indeed. We'll have to leave it there for the time being, but we'll touch on this topic again at 1700 GMT. Thank you very much for that. That's CCTV's Melanie Ralph live in London, keeping tabs on us for the G8 summit taking place in Northern Ireland. Let's move on to East Africa's biggest economy now. The Kenyan economy is expected to grow by 5.3% this year. That's more than the 4.7% recorded in 2012, supported by lower interest rates and higher investment flows. Now, according to the country's economic update launched by the World Bank earlier on Monday, a stable macroeconomic environment, peaceful elections held in March this year, as well as the smooth handover of political power, all offered a solid ground to support growth to 6% in 2014. But the World Bank country director, Diaretu Guy, says that East Africa's biggest economy must do much more to achieve the targeted growth of 10% per year, as envisaged in Kenya's economic blueprint, the Vision 2030. Now, she pointed out creating an enabling environment for the private sector-led growth by continuing to invest in infrastructure, increasing domestic energy output, sustaining sound monetary policies, and removing bottlenecks to doing business are all absolutely critical. Let's make a quick run through the markets now. Flood of red ink, quite frankly, across the board, starting as we usually do in Nigeria, 37,249.93. The market was about 0.4% or so of a percent down. That's the Nigerian all-share index for you. Over in South Africa, however, this posted the only green number on the board today. The all-share index at 4323.62, up 1.3 percentage points. In Nairobi, the NSE 20, 4,806.52, down just over 2/3. And the Egyptian market, the EGX 30, relatively flat on the day, but verging on the red.